Welcome to the museum. Glad to see everybody today. I have a special connection to this talk because while I wasn't at the Battle of the Bulge, I was about 200 miles away in Frankfurt, Germany at the time. The Battle of the Bulge took place between December the 16th through December the 16th, 44 through January 1945. I was born in Frankfurt in October 1943. And so I have a direct connection. Not many of you speakers have got direct connections to the actual events themselves. So we're going to start today with a little bit of an overview. Mainly we'll talk about the Battle of the Bulge, but you've seen a lot of different episodes here. This is number 8. We'll start off with the air war in Europe. Then we're going to talk about the famous D-Day, the invasion of Normandy by the Allies, which actually was the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. Talk a little bit about Operation Market Garden, which was Field Marshal Montgomery's attempt to get across the Rhine and get into the RAR Valley to strangle the German industrial heartland. That was a failure. We're going to see a little bit more about that. And these two dates are out of order because Hitler, there was an assassination attempt in July of 1944. And because of that, Hitler didn't trust his senior commanders at all. So he essentially took over the entire war effort against the better advice of his senior commanders. He decided to do one final stand. He drew forces away from the Eastern Front. He conscripted former veterans, people as young as 16 years old up to 60 years old, for the final push against the Allied forces here. Once they were pushed back from the Bulge, eventually we crossed the Rhine River. First was the Remagen Bridge in March of 1945, and then famous victory in Europe. But there's something to the aftermath that a lot of people don't talk about. In other words, what happened to the German population from the actual end of the war up through the reunification in 1990, and we'll try to cover a little bit about all those things here. First, looking at the air war. In 1939, the Luftwaffe devastated Poland, some of the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and he was very successful in that. Hitler tried to bring a surrender agreement from Great Britain here. The Brits weren't easily deterred. They fought back. So he was trying to form a separate peace with Britain. So they would then leave the Allies, that would leave America to itself to fight the German regime here. So that began in 1939. Unfortunately, that got the Allies all interested. They developed a very strong air force, and they wound up bombing cities into devastation. This is what Frankfurt looked like in 1945 here after the war. Okay. Poland, 1939, the Low Countries, the Luftwaffe was very effective in getting the British to leave Dunkirk to fight another day, basically, the Battle of Britain here. The United States Army Air Force was established in 1941. They were joined by the RAF Bomber Command with their Lancaster, Halifax, and other middle and heavyweight bombers. The major intent was the strategic bombing to destroy the industrial infrastructure of Nazi Germany, so they couldn't rebuild, they couldn't have their planes and fighter jets and all those things here. Another important task was the support to the ground troops here. Luftwaffe mainly had fighters, the Allies mainly had bombers here. The fighters were very effective until we got our own fighters. The famous Thunderbolt fighter here, the P-30 Lightnings and other fighters that protected the bombers, and so they were able to devastate large parts of Europe for that. Problem was that this consumed a very large fraction of the industrial output of both the Allies and the Germans there. So There's a lot of rebuilding and a lot of work that could have been done, but the civilian populations in both countries suffered because most of the effort was to make sure that the bomber forces were active. Okay, this is a map showing the percentage of destruction in Germany during the war here. The black shows the destruction here. This is about half destroyed. The white isn't too badly destroyed, but the percentage here, 1 to 15, over 5%. You can see Berlin was basically wiped out, 50%. Hamburg, these are the major port here, of course the capital here. So there was extreme devastation that was caused by the Allies all throughout the war. Okay, this is an example of Frankfurt. This is what it looked like in 1945. This is the Romerberg, where the Holy Roman Emperors were coronated here. You can see a church here. This is the same church. St. Pauli's Church is here. The Romerberg is there. And let's see, there's another building here that corresponds to this over here. The perspective is a little bit different. But you can see these are medieval cities that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's the extent of the devastation. But this is what it looks like today here. So it has been rebuilt, but with the help of the Allies and the Americans after the war through the Marshall Plan. Okay, the actual beginning of the end for the Germans was Operation Overlord, D-Day, which you heard about last month here. The Allied troops attacked the different beaches here. This was on the 6th of June. On the 30th of August, there were additional invasions that came up from Marseille and up from the south. This is a picture here, of course, of the landings themselves. And this is our very own LST. I'm sure you've seen this before, but here it is on Utah Beach on June the 12th. So this, again, shows what part between the Thunderbolts and the LST, what part we had actually in the eventual demise of the Nazi regime. Okay, starting off, the Great Invasion begins here. We've heard about this, all the ports that were captured. Ended up with weak defenses, which surprised the Allies. That was to change very soon here. At some point, they decided that, well, this is going to be pretty easy. And as it turned out, it wasn't the case at all. Okay, so here was the status of wartime Germany right after D-Day here. So we had the Allies attacking here. Later, we had the attack near Marseille up the Rhone River, which impacted the frontier to the south. This is about a 600-mile frontier here. So the Allies were attacking from the west to the east. The Russians were attacking from the east to the west over here. Now, this border is extremely, well, it's much longer than, this is about 600 miles here. You've got the North Sea there. You've got Switzerland, a neutral country over here. So Hitler was extremely worried. His battle forces had been depleted by all of the deaths that happened. Most of his forces were taking care of the Western Front. He was spread very, very thin. Now, this was in wintertime. The Russian tanks needed frozen ground to be able to move across the surface. So they'd come to a standstill. The supply lines of the Allies were pretty much depleted as well. We were outrunning our supplies here. So the Allies managed to get through here, captured Paris, and got up just about to the border with Germany right here. Hitler decided that to make one last stand, he needed to pull forces from the Eastern Front. He needed conscripts, additional people, and to pull a surprise attack in this region of the Ardennes. This is Luxembourg, this is Belgium, and of course France is to the south here. Now there is a region in Germany called the Eifel, which is also heavily wooded, heavily forested here. The Eifel provided forest cover for all the troops that would be massed along the border there. The Luftwaffe would fly planes at night to cover up the noise of all the tanks and the equipment that were coming up to this line. Eisenhower's troops were mainly battle-weary veterans, divisions and battalions that were depleted. It was nearing Christmas time, it was winter. Nobody expected an offense from the Germans through this part of the front lines at that time here. Field Marshal Montgomery asked Eisenhower if he could go back to London to visit his son for Christmas at the time. Nobody was expecting anything at all. Okay. Around the same time, Field Marshal Montgomery decided to get into the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr Valley, again, was the industrial heartland. And they managed to get the 1st Airborne, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 101st Airborne Division here. Montgomery wanted to get a 68-mile corridor that extended from the Allied lines up through 9 different bridges up to Arnhem, and then the Ruhr Valley, which is over here to the east, over here. It was partially successful. They managed to cross several of these lines here, but they were eventually stopped right by Arnhem there. So Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, pulled everybody back at the time and decided that they would regroup because they just weren't going to be successful. Patton said that my men can eat their belts, but my tanks need gas for their trucks and so on. Unfortunately, during the Allied bombing, most of the ports, the railway systems and the ports in France had been destroyed by the Allies. You might have seen the famous Red Ball Express here were truck convoys, but they had to go all the way from Cherbourg and Marseille to get over to that part of the eastern, the German front lines there. Here. They tried converting bombers to tankers, but it turned out that for every 2 gallons of gasoline that were delivered to the front lines, they used 3 gallons of gasoline. So this was not a very effective way to do that here. The British had captured the port of Antwerp here, but the Germans still held the Scheldt estuary. They controlled the river. The river was mined. They had heavy artillery on both sides. So while we controlled the city itself of Antwerp, it wasn't accessible to the Allies because the waterway wasn't available here. So Hitler decided to launch an attack around Christmas time. You had bad weather. The Allies couldn't fly air cover, and that would be a surprise. Okay. When he first announced this, again, he'd come from a recent assassination attempt. And so he was basically controlling the war all by himself, and he was determined that the Germans were going to win over here. He pulled essential troops from the Russian front. He got untrained civilians in there. His chief commanders here said, no, this is never going to work. We just don't have enough capability here in order to pull this off. But he was determined, and he ran the show all by himself over here. The idea was to split the Allies here. The Canadians and the British were in the northern part of the region. The Americans were down in the southern part of the region. If he could split the two, he thought that the British and the Canadians would be demoralized. They don't have the population or the resources that the United States does. And so they wound up, well, he tried to capture those troops so that they would sign a separate peace and they would be disengaged from the war. And then the Americans would be by themselves and it would be much easier to handle them. Hitler could concentrate his forces there. So there were 2 key towns there, Bastogne and St. Vit. Both of those were communication centers. All of the roads connected there. There were very few, wasn't wide open spaces here. So all of the roads converged in those 2 places. Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division and the 10th Armored Division into Bastogne in order to hold it so that the Germans wouldn't capture the intersection of all the roads there. Here. The town was surrounded. The Germans sent a note into the commander of the 101st Airborne Division, Anthony McAuliffe, and said that, look, you're surrounded, you're going to kill civilians, we've got an overwhelming force, so you better surrender. And McAuliffe said to him, nuts. Today would be a different expletive probably, but they decided that they weren't going to surrender. And the 101st and the 10th Armored Division were able to control Bastogne long enough to get reinforcements in. The weather cleared, they were able to drop supplies, and finally Patton's army from the south came in and managed to free them and push them all the way back to the German border. Yeah. So the plan of attack, this is called the West Wall or the Siegfried Line. It was a series of fortifications, dragon's teeth, which were concrete barriers to interrupt the tank traffic, series of bunkers, and various other very strong fortifications, a series of underground trenches, and so on. Here. The Rhine River is here. This was before the Rhine here. There were three armies that Hitler was going to send in. The infantry would go in first. The 6th Army, the 6th Panzer Division would go in next. The commander and the 5th Army Division was down here. 6th Army would take the northern flank here. The ultimate goal was to reach Antwerp. Remember, Antwerp was, again, in Allied hands for now. However,